Hello everyone, and welcome to our next community featured build. Today for you, we have the Immortal Magicka Nightblade by zDan, and this is a very bulky, out of stealth Magicka Nightblade build that runs Fire Staff and Restoration Staff. It's got some serious power as well. There you see that snappy kill. But this build is built not to die. It has got an insane amount of damage reduction throughout the build. Fully buffed in the new Elsewhere patch, it has got 63% damage reduction and a really high amount of armor values, and on top of it, this build has just crapping out heals over time. So a massive shout out to zDan for sending the build in to be featured. I'm sorry it took me so long to get this video together, but I would highly recommend that you guys check out zDan's YouTube channel. He creates ESO content, and of course, he's got a lot of footage of this build in action. Now, zDan has also provided us with some gameplay footage of the build, and he's also provided us with an alternate spec using a two-handed greatsword on the front bar instead of the fire staff. So I hope that you guys enjoy. I hope that you guys love this build, and please check out zDan's channel. Give this man a sub. Check out his videos. And without further ado, guys, let's jump into that build. So to begin, zDan has picked Breton for this build, and Breton of course is a fantastic race for any Magicka build, giving you tons of sustain, the max Magicka as well, and the cost reduction. Breton is a really good choice. Now, you can pick other races for this build. Other Magicka races like High Elf and Dark Elf will work well, and of course I think that Nord is also a good choice because this is such a bulky build, and Nord gives you that additional bulk. But zDan, of course, has gone with Breton, and he's been playing this build for quite some time, so I'm going to say Breton is definitely the best race for this spec. Now, taking a look at the attributes, zDan has gone with full Magicka, and then when we look at the max stat, we can see almost 42k Magicka, we've got 25.6k health, and then 16k maximum stamina. Now, I'm actually going to buff up with the pet as well, and we see the maximum Magicka on this build go up to 46k, so quite a lot of Magicka on this build. And having the high Magicka pool, of course, is great because we have the Harness Magicka damage shield, and it's going to affect our damage and healing, so that's what we stack for the damage on this spec. The hit points, of course, coming in at 25k is great too. We do have the hit point based heal on this spec, so having 25k is going to ensure that that's a fairly strong heal, and of course 25k plus hit points makes you harder to burst down in PvP. The 16k stamina, so important for PvP. Having a large stamina pool allows you to do a lot of stuff with your stamina in quick succession, and I think that's very important, especially on something like a Magicka Nightblade. So we're going to buff up and take a look at the regen on this spec. The Magicka recovery is just shy of 2,000, 1,999, 360 health recovery, and 650 stamina recovery. Now, the Magicka sustain on this build is actually much better than the 2k recovery here suggests. We've got the Elemental Drain for the Magicka Steel, we've got Siphoning Strikes and Harness Magicka, so a great amount of Magicka sustain on this spec just from those abilities on our bars. The health recovery is not important, we've got a ton of heal over time, and then the stamina recovery is a little low, coming in at 650. Now, this build doesn't use stamina for anything really other than the occasional dodge roll and breaking free, so you're not really blocking attacks, you're using your shields instead to soak up the damage. So I would say that this is totally fine for this spec, but if you guys want to add a little bit more stamina recovery to this build, you can, and you'll probably want to drop a bit of Magicka recovery for it. That being said, though, this is how zDan likes to play it, so I would take his word for it and try it like this first. Now, the spell damage on this build, when we buff up with the potion, is coming in at 2,050 on our front bar with 42% spell crit. Now, we do have the increased weapon spell damage enchant on our restoration staff as well, so we get just shy of 2,500 spell damage when we're fully buffed on this spec. And of course, the crit rate is really nice because we are in light armor too, so we've got that additional crit rate, and we have that penetration, which does not show up on our stat sheet here. Now, when we take a look at the armor buffs on this build, when we buff up, we've got a whopping 27.7k spell resist and 24.6k physical resistance with 2,800 critical resist. So really nice armor buffs on this build. It's fairly bulky, but that is not what makes this build so tanky. These are great armor values for light armor, but what makes this build so tanky is all the percent reduction that zDan runs on it, and we'll get into that when we take a look at the sets on this spec. Now for the Mundus on this build, we have got the Atronach here. Like I mentioned earlier, if you guys feel like you want a little bit more stam sustain, you can switch out the Atronach for the Serpent just to try it out, because this build does have a ton of Magicka sustain. When I play tested it, I found the sustain was really, really good. And of course in zDan's footage, you will see how good the sustain is too. And then the food for this build is the increase all primary stats. And I really like this choice because it will give the additional health, which is important for the healing power, the additional magicka, important for damage and healing, and then stamina, of course, is so important for world PvP, especially on a magicka build. You need to be able to break free, you need to be able to roll out of things. So the increase all primary stat food is a great choice for this build for that reason. And then taking a look at the potions that zDan runs, the first potion that he uses is the Essence of Spell Power. This will give the major sorcery buff, the major prophecy buff for the spell damage and spell crit bonuses, and it of course restores some magicka and gives the magicka recovery buff. This is the primary potion you want to use on this spec, but of course zDan uses a variety of other potions depending on the situation. The other potion he likes to use is the Essence of Detection, so we forego the critical chance buff from our previous potion, and instead we get Stealth Detect on it here. This is great if you're going to fight other Nightblades that are going into stealth, giving you a little bit more utility against a variety of opponents. And then, of course, there is the Tri-Stat Potion. And this is, of course, if you're running low on stamina, this is the potion you want to go to on this build. It'll give you that stamina return and the stamina recovery and a bit of healing power too, which is really nice as well. Alright, so let's take a look at the gear that zDan is running. The first set that he's got is the Pirate Skeleton, and this is one of the big percent reduction on this build that makes this build very tanky. So it adds physical and spell resistance to the build, and then on the two-piece, when we take damage to our health, we have an 8% chance to transform into a skeleton and gain minor protection and minor defile for 12 seconds. Major protection, of course, is 30% reduced incoming damage. That is such a big deal, but of course it reduces the healing power of this spec, but the major protection definitely outweighs the loss of healing power. It is very, very strong, and this is going to make this build very, very bulky when this set procs. Now, something zDan did want to mention is that there's a bit of lag when the Pirate Skeleton set procs on you, and one of the best ways to deal with it is to wear an outfit. So I'm not actually sure myself which outfits are the best for it, but you can use any outfit that is a costume that covers your character's body, or even a polymorph is a good option too. If you have the skeleton polymorph, this is probably the best option, because then you will be the same in and outside of your pirate skeleton buff. So yeah, I thought that was worth mentioning. It is something that zDan did want me to mention, is there's a bit of lag when the set goes off, and wearing an outfit seems to help with that. Now the next set that we've got on is the Necropotent set. And zDan picked this, of course, for that max magicka bonus that it provides. We've got max mag, max mag, max mag, and then 3,000 magicka when we have a pet active. Really, really good set, especially for a build like this that's using the damage shield. And of course, the shade that we summon and we can teleport back to counts as the pet. So it just goes to show the importance of keeping that pet up, if not for the teleport, for the additional damage and healing buff as well. Now, taking a look at the next set, we have got the Necklace of the Swift, and zDan picked this one yet again for that percent reduction. We've got max magicka, spell, and physical resistance. Huge chunk of just bulkiness just from the spell and physical resist buff there. But then we've got the reduced damage from players by 10%. 10% reduced damage is a massive amount. It is all sources of damage too, so a very, very good set to wear in PvP. Now, for the traits on the weapons, the Inferno Staff is Nirnhoned with a shock damage glyph on it. Nirnhoned, of course, is a great choice for this build. It's going to increase the outgoing damage of all of our primary attacks and give us a little bit of additional healing power on this bar as well. The shock glyph is a good choice because it can apply the minor vulnerability, just further pushing the damage that this build can deal when that glyph goes off. And then the Restoration Staff is defending with the weapon and spell damage enchant on it. I like the choice of defending because this build is already so bulky, so it's just adding more defense to the build. And then the weapon spell damage enchant is, of course, great for increasing our outgoing damage and healing when we poke with our off bar here. Now, taking a look at the jewelry, it is full arcane with 2 magicka recovery enchants and 1 spell damage enchant. The choice of arcane, of course, is great because we are using damage shields, so that's going to make our harness magicka even better. The magicka recovery is awesome too, just giving more sustain to this build, and then the spell damage for a little bit of additional damage here. And then for the gear, guys, we have got full impenetrable on this spec. Impenetrable is so important for a build like this that's going to be using damage shields and heals over time to soak up incoming damage. And then zDan has gone for 2 tri-stat enchants on his chest piece here and on his legs for a little bit more health, magicka, stamina in those spots. And then everything else is maximum magicka on this build. Alright, so let's take a look at the skills that zDan uses on this spec. So the first bar we're going to take a look at is the Destruction Staff bar. The first skill that we've got is Merciless Resolve. So in the upcoming Elsewhere patch, this ability has actually been changed quite a bit compared to what it is on live. So on the live server, it gives you Minor Berserk, and then of course you get the Merciless Resolve bow shot after 5 consecutive light or heavy attacks. On the Elsewhere patch, this is going to give you reduced incoming damage by 3% per light attack, stacking up to 5 times, and then you lose the reduced damage when you shoot the bow, but it heals you for 50% damage dealt if you're within 7 meters of the enemy. So it functions very differently on the live server, but I think it is definitely great for zDan's build. We have yet again another source of damage reduction, percent damage reduction on this build. So we've got the 10%, the 30%, and then an additional 15% here. We're already at 55% damage reduction with all the buffs up on the Elsewhere patch. So really, really good skill. And then, of course, the burst on this bow. 18k tooltip. We're not even buffed up. That's going to hit super hard. When we fully buff here with the pet and the potion, we can see the tooltip coming in at 20.5k. And yeah, really nice burst skill, really nice defensive skill. I actually kind of like the change, and especially for zDan's build, this is going to be a great skill for him. Now, the next ability that we've got is Crippling Grasp. This is going to be the primary damage over time for this build. It will also immobilize and snare the target, so a nice little bit of CC pressure there with it too. This is, of course, going to help this build wear down any target that can deal with the incoming burst that this build has. Now, the next skill that zDan has is Swallow Soul, and this is the primary spammable for the build. A nice nearly 9k tooltip on it, healing for 46% of the damage inflicted every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. So you can get a huge amount of healing power off of this as well. And paired with the new Merciless Resolve, I actually really like this because this is just a lot of healing power coming from just attacking on this build. And of course, the Siphoning Strikes for even more healing power on attacking. Really, really nice combination of things on this spec. Now, the next skill that zDan has is Mass Hysteria. This, yet again, is actually getting buffed in the Elsewhere patch. It will now fear up to 6 enemies and make them cower in fear for 5 seconds. On top of it, it no longer makes a feared opponent run away. They stay in spot. I think that's worth mentioning because we get the heal off the Merciless if our opponent is close to us. So if we land the fear into the Merciless, we can get a nice big heal off that and not accidentally knock them out of the healing range. But a really great stun for this spec. Of course, this is a very tanky build, so you have a lot of opponents jump on top of you, and this is the way that you're going to just crowd control the group around you. Now, the next ability that zDan has is Elemental Drain. This is going to apply Major Breach to the target, reducing their spell resistance by 5k. Very important for increasing outgoing damage. And then it also applies the Minor Magicka Steal to the enemy for 24 seconds, allowing you to get 300 Magicka every 1 second off your opponent while damaging them. Really great for sustain and outgoing damage on this build. When you have this ability up with all the other sustain that this build has, you should literally never run out of Magicka, and the increased burst that this ability gives is really worthwhile. I think that spell penetration is very important. And then for the ultimate, zDan has gone with Soul Tether. And Soul Tether, of course, is a nice big AoE burst ultimate. It's going to hit everyone around you and stun them for 4 seconds. And while they're nearby you, you will tether them and heal yourself for 2,000 health per target every 1 second. Really, really good skill yet again for this build, just playing into that kind of healing over time. So much heals over time on this build, and this ultimate is going to add a lot of bulk when you've got a lot of opponents on top of you as well. Now, you can, of course, always go for the Assassination Ultimate if you want, but I think that if you have to go for the Assassination Ult into in-cap, you actually have the same tooltip in-cap versus the Soul Tether, and then if you go for Soul Harvest, you'll have a little bit more ult gen, but you don't get the stun off the ultimate. So it's kind of up to the user what you want to do here. zDan uses both in the footage that I've seen him play this build, so it's really up to the user. And then for the back bar, guys, the first ability we have is Harness Magicka. This is going to be the primary damage shield for the build. We're going to buff up with the pet so you guys can see the full shield value on this spec. And here we see a 9.4k damage shield over 6 seconds. And the shield strength is capped at 40% of your maximum health. And then while the shield is active, up to 3 times when spell damage is absorbed, you restore 1384 Magicka. And each piece of light armor you wear will increase the effectiveness of this ability. A really great ability for this build because we have so much healing over time, putting the Harness Magicka over top, and the fact that the Harness Magicka will be pretty much free if we're getting attacked by a lot of targets means that you can just have a huge amount of healing power on this spec and the shield over top of it to protect your health bar while you're healing away. So really nice just for the defensive purposes of this build, and a very cheap shield for world PvP because you'll have a lot of spell projectiles coming in at you at most times. Now, the next ability that we've got is Healing Ward, and this is the primary oh crap heal for the build. It's going to put a damage shield over you that drastically increases in strength depending on how much damage that you've taken. And of course, when the shield expires, you heal for 133% of the shield's remaining strength. So a nice big heal at the end if you can, of course, keep the shield on you for the full duration. Really good ability for this build. This build does not have a burst heal, so this is kind of your burst heal or burst shield just to protect you when you're taking a lot of incoming damage or you need to quickly have a strong defense against something and you're quite injured already. Now, the next ability we've got is Siphoning Attacks. This is such a great skill for the build, just synergizing yet again with all the heals over time that this build has. It makes our light and heavy attacks heal for 1858 health and restore 106 Magicka for 20 seconds. And then at the end of the effect's duration, we restore an additional 4,270 Magicka. So a really good sustain skill and a really good heal over time skill. Yet again, just fantastic for this build. Now, the next ability we have is Shadow Image. This is a very important skill yet again because we have to have a pet up to have that Necropotence buff on this spec. This is the pet for the Magicka Nightblade, and then its second very important aspect is that you can teleport back to the Shade after you've set it down. Now, this gives the Magicka Nightblade the ability to move around while still getting heavily snared and immobilized, and I think that's very important that you use your Shade, especially on an out-of-stealth build like this, and in the footage that we'll see, you guys will see really good Shade usage by zDan. He does a great job teleporting around and just mitigating damage and using the Shade to LOS a lot of opponents. So this is how you're going to stay mobile and, of course, keep up your Necro buff on the spec. And then the minor maim that the Shade afflicts means that if you're in a one-on-one on this build, on top of all the damage reduction that you have, you will now reduce your opponent's damage done by 15%. So just adding even more bulk to the spec as well. And then for the last normal ability, zDan has gone with Dark Cloak, and this is, of course, a heal over time for this spec, and not only that, but it is also access to minor protection for the build as well, and it is access to the armor buffs on this build too. So with the elsewhere changes, the heal over time on this is now 8 seconds instead of 4, and the minor protection lasts for the 8 seconds now as well, so it's a little bit less of a burst heal, but it's about the same amount of healing power, but you get the additional duration on the protection. I actually think for zDan's build, this is a really great ability still. Even though the burst heal on it's a little bit weaker, that uptime on the minor protection is really fantastic, and of course the armor buffs that it gives is super important. So I think it's important to make sure that you rotate this skill every 8 seconds while you're playing this build. And then finally, guys, for the ultimate on the back bar, zDan has gone with Light's Champion. In the Elsewhere patch, this will no longer give you major protection, but it will give you the major force buff still for the increased critical damage. And of course, it is such a strong heal over time. 10k health every 1 second for 5 seconds. Really powerful heal. Now, something that zDan did mention is that he really likes the Race Against Time skill for this build in the upcoming Elsewhere patch because it gives you the ability to remove all snares and immobilizations and make you immune to them for 4 seconds. Now, if you want to use this skill on the build, zDan says he would probably drop Elemental Drain for it, and I agree with the choice to drop a sustain-based skill because this build has such good Magicka sustain. So Race Against Time is going to give you not only that snare and immobilization resistance, but it'll also give you the minor force buff, which is going to increase your outgoing damage, and it's going to be easy access to Major Expedition as well. Alright guys, so let's take a look at the champion points that this build's rocking. In the tower tree, we've got 37 Siphoner and 56 Warlord with 2 bashing focus. A huge focus on Warlord because that is primarily what this build is going to be doing with its stamina pool, is breaking free. And yeah, good choice to put a lot of points here. And 37 in Siphoner, and I actually really like this because this build has really good sustained pressure and it's very bulky. So if you're fighting an opponent, this is just going to make it harder for them to sustain their resources, allowing you to apply more pressure and hopefully taking the fight home. And the 2 in bashing focus is, I think zDan had a couple points left over and he just put them there. Now, taking a look at the lover tree, he has got 27 Mooncalf and 64 in Arcanist. This is reflecting the sustain on this build. Arcanist, of course, is the most important because we've got so much mag sustain. The Mooncalf coming in second for that stamina recovery as well. And then in the Shadow Tree, we've got 61 Tumbling and 23 in Shadow Ward. Focus on Tumbling for zDan because, of course, this is a Magicka Nightblade, and you're going to find yourself snared and immobilized on it, so Tumbling is going to help out a lot by allowing you to roll out of those immobilizes and just stay mobile. And then Block, of course, is important for PvP. Regardless of what spec you're running, you've got to block. And then looking at the Apprentice tree, zDan's got 46 Spell Erosion, 56 Elemental, 56 Elfborn, and 19 in Blessed. So the spread here is favoring critical damage and base damage just a little bit, and I actually like that choice because we've got a lot of heal over time, so the critical damage will affect the increased healing power too, and then a little bit in Blessed to give us that increased healing done as well, and we cannot neglect our spell penetration. We do get the Arcane Well passive here, but in PvP you can't really utilize that super well, but the Spell Precision passive is of course important for that 9% additional spell critical. Taking a look at the Atronach tree, zDan's got 73 Master at Arms and 20 in Shattering Blows. A huge amount in Master at Arms, of course, is always important because direct damage is, I think on this build, almost every damage source is direct damage on this spec, minus the damage over time from Cripple. And then Shattering Blows, of course, is great because zDan's running the dual staves, so a little bit of additional light and heavy attack damage there. And then nothing in the Ritual. This is no stamina build. And then in the Steed tree, we've got 52 Ironclad and 38 in Resistant. Ironclad, of course, so important to reduce incoming direct damage that you take. Most burst damage is direct damage, so this is very important for PvP. And then Resistant, also very important because there are tons of crits going around in PvP, so you want to make sure you have some critical resistance. In the Lady tree, we've got 37 Hardy, 37 Elemental, 40 Thick Skin, and 10 in Light Armor Focus. A really nice even spread here. zDan, yet again, focusing on that percent reduced damage on this spec. So lots of reduced incoming damage there. And then a big focus on Thick Skin because this build doesn't have a Purge. It has to out-heal / out-shield the damage over time. So I like that idea to put a lot of Thick Skin as well. And then in the Lord tree, we've got a whopping 56 in Bastion for the increased effectiveness of our damage shields, and this is for that Harness Magicka and the Healing Ward. The Healing Ward heal is of course based off of how big the shield is, so this is going to make the Healing Ward a more potent heal than it would be if we dumped a lot in Quick Recovery. So there you go, guys. That is the build. Alright guys, so let's get into that PvP commentary. So to start off, you can see zDan is outside of a keep here, and he's fairly low resource. He's got a lot of players on him, and I'd imagine it's been a struggle to get to this spot, and he goes into his Resto ult, and just look at how fast his sustain shoots up as long as he keeps his buffs up and continues to light attack and fight back against these guys, just rotating his heals over time and making sure to keep his buffs up as well. There we see he goes for the Fear, takes a nasty leap from the enemy Dragon Knight. His Shade is now down as well. zDan's just trying to put the pressure into this guy, hits him with the elemental weakness, but takes another nasty stun, and he just gets right back up, sets his Shade down, continues to put pressure into this guy. We see the Swallow Soul, the bow, oh my gosh, a massive spike to bring that guy down, takes another stun from the Dragon Knight's leap, and he's just going to turn, set his debuff on the DK, go for the tether, hitting a lot of players with the tether there, unfortunately not getting the stun on the DK, but continuing to apply pressure and preventing the reses there with the bash. Unfortunately, there were 2 players rezzing, and zDan is unable to stop the second player from rezzing. He just continues to rotate his buffs here, but goes right away for pressure on the player that he's rezzed. And he's just continuing to attack with his Swallow Soul at a distance and just keeping his buffs up yet again. Goes for his shield here, goes into his elemental weakness on this guy and starts to put the pressure on. And right away, you guys can just see how well this build can hold its ground and fight against even multiple opponents. As long as he keeps his buffs up and makes sure to rotate on these guys with the Swallow Souls, he can stay alive, taking a lot of damage from the Dragon Knights there, both coming in with their leaps, but zDan responds really well with his shields and just redots these guys up and continues to apply pressure to them. And here we see he goes for the fear. He gets the fear on both of them. He starts putting damage into the Magicka Dragon Knight here, but the Mag DK just kind of tanking it out. zDan just keeping his buffs up, continuing to rotate. There we see the bow into the tether. The DK just tries to roll out of it. zDan finishing him off with the last poke there. And now he's going to fight off this last DK. And the two yellow players there, they just want to watch zDan tear it up out here. And here you see he's putting a lot of pressure into this DK. A cheeky little bash to stop the res. And he takes the fight home there. And now zDan's going to go after this guy as well. There are no friends in PvP. He sets him up with the debuffs, goes into his Swallow Soul. The tether puts good damage into him, but the enemy Stam Sork reacts well, getting a lot of healing off his Surge as well. zDan takes the Dawnbreaker from the enemy Sork. He's going to reset his buffs, reset his heals, go for a Fear, puts good damage into him. Unfortunately, zDan's running low on Magicka, so he's just going to reset his elemental weakness to get that Magicka steal and continue to fight this Stamina Sorcerer, just rotating on him, rotating his heals over time and continuing to apply the Swallow Soul pressure to him as well. And the Stamina Sorcerer's got a lot of healing power, and zDan's just trying to whittle him down here. Gets him with a good fear there. He's got the Shade for the maim as well. Goes for the tether, goes for the bow, but the enemy Sork does a good job dodging the bow there. And zDan hits him with a huge counterattack after he goes for his Dawnbreaker. Nicely played. Very well done. Now, for the next couple clips, zDan actually sent me some footage of him playing the melee variant spec of this build. So he's got a greatsword on his front bar, and he's also got concealed weapon instead of Swallow Soul. But here you can see the healing power on this build is still fantastic, and the bulk is still fantastic, so he doesn't need the Swallow Soul to have enough healing power. And instead of running the weakness to elements, he's also running Mark. But as you can see right away, he's got 4 yellow players on top of him here, and zDan is just continuing to tank this out, no problem, putting pressure into this player there. He goes for his ultimate there too. He is running the other ultimate as well, but he takes a lot of damage from this yellow group, and he goes for a kite around the tree. There we see that great Shade gameplay to make these guys move around. zDan's just going to hop back behind the rocks here, continuing to rotate his heals, and they just cannot hurt him. He's just too bulky for them, and he's going to take a nasty stun from the Warden there. Lots of direction changes as well. He's got the Shade. He's going to teleport back to his Shade and just continue to move around this group, and that's a big part of this build, is making sure that you use the Shade to stay mobile, especially when you have too much pressure on top of you. And we see zDan doing just that. He's rotating his heals, but also turning around to make sure that he continues to poke these guys. He doesn't want to stop attacking them at any point. And there we see he's just continuing to kite them out. He takes the stun from the incoming Fire Staff there. He breaks it right away. He's just going to move back behind the rocks here, reset all of his buffs, and then open on this guy here. He hits him with the cripple and then goes for the fear into the bow, into the surprise attacks. Great damage on that player there. However, an enemy Earthgore comes in, saving him, and zDan's just going to go for a little bit of a kite again, and then reopen on this player here, putting great damage into him. Oh my gosh, his hit points are so low. He is just desperately trying to get away. zDan finishing him off with the concealed weapon there, and now he's just going to reset his heals and open up on this player that's in the field next to the dead player. He goes for his cripple, moves towards the player, hits him with a ultimate into the concealed weapon, into the bow, a huge combo, and the enemy Sork just dropping negate on top of himself, so zDan is forced out of that position, and the Sork sits inside of the negate. zDan's just patient, waits for the negate to go down, and then reopens on the Sork here with his concealed weapon, just taking the damage from the Nightblade behind him, but zDan just rotating his heals, making sure that he can take that damage out, actually taking a pretty big burst there, but there we see he goes right into his shields, into his heal over time, hits the Sork with the fear, and down he goes, and now zDan has just got this single Nightblade left to fight here, and he's going to jump around a bit, waiting for this Nightblade to finally re-engage. He finds the Nightblade, hits him with the fear. There we see actually that stealth detect potion coming in clutch, and zDan applies the pressure with the concealed weapon, brings him down. And finally, for the last clip, guys, we have got the melee variant of the spec with the greatsword yet again. And zDan's just fighting this guy here. He gets marked by the enemy Nightblade, but he just goes for his in-cap into the bow, gets good pressure. Actually, I think he's running Swallow Soul because he did go for the fear stun there. And there we see, again, he goes for the fear, goes for the concealed weapon. This Nightblade trying desperately to out-heal the damage. Takes another fear from zDan, but just look at this Templar coming in, saving the Nightblade with the breath of life there. The enemy Nightblade throws down the Ballista on zDan, but zDan just so bulky, goes right for the pressure on the Templar, quickly bringing him down, and turns to fight the incoming Warden and the Nightblade now. And he just continues to keep his heals up, goes for the fear on the Nightblade, hits him with the ultimate there into the concealed weapons. The Nightblade so close to dying, goes into stealth, and zDan notices the Warden trying to res the enemy Templar. He shoots the bow at him and just hits him with a quick bash and turns right back to the enemy Nightblade here, who eats the fear. Oh my gosh, gets saved by the stun from the Warden, but it's not enough. zDan quickly bringing him down there, and now he's going to fight this enemy Warden. Resets all his heals here as the Warden goes into his ultimate, and just look at zDan easily tanking out the Warden's pressure and just continues to apply his own pressure. Goes for the cripple, into the fear, into the bow, the concealed weapons, putting great damage into the Warden, but the Warden just responds with his own defensive gameplay, and zDan's just going to continue to rotate on him, continue to apply that deadly pressure that a build like this can. It's just so bulky, he can just stay on the offensive for such a long time. And he's just continuing to apply the pressure to this player, making sure to hit him with the fear as often as possible, keeping his defenses up as well. And zDan just doing a great job keeping the pressure up on this Warden. The Warden is doing a good job too fighting back, but look at zDan's hit point bar. Whenever the Warden hits him with a lot of damage, zDan takes very little damage and quickly shoots right back up to full health. And there you see zDan hits him with a huge combo there into the fear. Really clean gameplay, but the Warden responds really well himself with the block hold into the heal there, preventing zDan from hitting the finishing blow. And zDan's just going to continue to rotate the fears on this Warden. The Warden goes for his ultimate. zDan just takes the stun, sets his own defensive abilities down, and he just easily tanks it out. Shades outside of the ultimate as well, and now he's going to reopen on this Warden. So as we get to the end of the video, I'm going to let this last fight play out. A huge shout out yet again to zDan for sending in the build. Thank you so much, man. I hope that you guys like this build. Check out zDan's YouTube channel. There's a link, of course, in the description below, and give this man a sub. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you guys are new here, hit that subscribe button. I create regular ESO content, and of course we have more featured builds, and we've got top 5 PvP battles. So be sure to check that stuff out. If you guys are interested in sending in your own build or your own clips for the top 5, you guys can send them in to KristoferESO@hotmail.com. And finally, guys, we are sponsored by What the Fast. They're a VPN for gamers. They give me better ping to my favorite games, and they're free to try for the first 14 days. No credit card to sign up. Thank you guys so much again for watching. Thank you again to zDan. Have a great night, everybody, and I hope to see you next time.